Hey, what's going on? Today on the podcast, we have an inspirational story. Kid who came here from Peru, developed an app at 14 years old, supported his family, went over to Facebook to get mentored by Mark Zuckerberg. He's one of Forbes 30 under 30, and he's called the most influential Latino in Silicon Valley. And guess what? He's only 25 years old, currently works for Roblox, and that's the only reason that my son Declan is watching this right now. Michael Sayman joins us. All right, I'm going to hit you with a hard one off the bat. Ready?
Wait.
Tough question. So, three people: Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs. Murder, fuck, kill.
All right, let's see here. Okay, so we got Mark Zuckerberg,
Bill Gates, Steve Jobs.
Bill Gates.
We're going to assume that everyone's living. I don't want to get into some weird, like, out because of necrophilia.
All right, let's just, okay, so.
I love how much thought you're putting. He's like, what if I say the wrong one?
All right.
There's no wrong answer. It's cool.
Okay, fuck Steve Jobs.
Fuck Steve Jobs.
Marry Mark Zuckerberg, kill Bill Gates.
Really? I think, see, most people, I get marry Steve Jobs. I think, like, most people are going to lean on to, like murder, like, Zuckerberg.
I fuck Steve Jobs.
You fuck Steve Jobs. You'd marry Zuckerberg, right? But I think most people are leaning on the fact, like, personally, like, when I hear the name Mark Zuckerberg, I don't really have a lot of, like, you have a lot of personal experience with him. He's your mentor, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I just hear the name Zuckerberg, and truthfully, it's all, like, weeded through just, like,
you
the
see
movies.
it through the lens of, the hearings or CNN or whatever.
Yeah, so, like, I'm like, oh, nobody wants to like that guy. But
they're like, lizard people,
Yeah, that's crazy. So, so, like, everyone that wants to check out your book, The App Kid, can bring themselves up to speed with your background and stuff, and we'll talk about it a little bit here and there. But, like, you got mentored by Mark Zuckerberg at, you think you were 17 years old, right? When you were a full-time employee at Facebook. What was?
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird. I was practically raised by Facebook when I was a kid. I grew up there from like 17 till I was like 21, 22. Basically, all of my upbringing was kind of defined by a bunch of product managers in their 40s. It's weird. Maybe that's why I said Mary Zuck. I don't know.
Well, I mean, like, so you were, like, mentored by Mark Zuckerberg. I remember one of your interviews, you were talking about, like, being in a math class and having Mark Zuckerberg message you, and your teacher takes your iPad or your iPhone away, and you're like, I want to, like, how do you not message Zuckerberg back, right? But what was that mentorship like? Like, did he give you some great advice, or what was it like on a daily basis?
It was actually pretty direct and clear. Like, I think he understood that I understood what my role was at the company, and it was kind of at that point, right? So it was like he would have some problem he's trying to solve regarding, I don't know, the teen space or the Snapchat competition or something like that, and I kind of understood that just based on the way that he would communicate about that, and so I would just spend, I don't know, the next couple of weeks on my team trying to get the engineers on my team and the designers on my team to build out a proposal solution for a problem space that I suspected he was trying to solve. And then, like, my caretakers or whatever, the middle management would walk into the my team's room and be like, hey, are you guys ready to go? And I'd be like, yeah, I'm ready. Like, let's show what we've got to Zuckerberg. And they'd take us to his meeting room, which is funny because, like, I could just message him on Messenger, but they wanted to go through this whole formal process, and the middle management would get so nervous when I'd walk into that meeting room with Zuck. They'd all be like sitting there quietly, like, I don't know, all the VPs, the people, and and I would just kind of sit there, show him what we have, and sometimes he'd be like, I don't understand why you guys are doing this. I think you should do something else or something like that. And other times he'd be like, this is genius. Like, we need to, talk to this person. Let's add this here. Let's put this there. And so, sometimes he'd be like, this is amazing. And the middle management people would be so confused. Like, they don't know. Like, it's almost like they're just sitting there hoping that the conversation goes great and Zuckerberg is happy. And they have absolutely no idea what anyone is saying in the conversation because they're just middle management. And so, like, a lot of times that's how it would go down. And separate to that, of course, I would have my back channel with Zuckerberg. So, like, I'd have, like, those meetings, but then on the side, whenever I found something or saw something coming up or a trend or a change happening on some competitor, I'd message Zuckerberg and I'd be like, hey, by the way, check this out. And we'd talk about it sometimes. Sometimes he'd message me and be like, hey, like, I want to try out, let's try out Snapchat. So he'll send me like a username he made for like trying to use Snapchat. And he and I would just like snap. And I try and tell him when it was weird. Like, but it was good. It was good. I mean, it was good in the sense that like, I felt it was cool that someone like Zuckerberg cared what a teenager had to think. But at the same time, I understood the value that I provided. Like, obviously, I was of a different generation. He's trying to target younger users. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, Facebook's demographic is older than you are now, and obviously older than you were then. So for a long time, you were like the conduit. When did you work at Facebook? What year was that?
2014 to 2017.
So okay, so for those 3 years, you were really like Facebook's like conduit to that younger generation. You were really the voice of. How did you keep your fingers on the pulse of like what people were doing then? Were you like, hey, what app are you using to send dick pics? You need something that's faster. Zuck, we need to get the like. How did you do that?
My sister, I'm not the most socially aware person, and if anything, I would say like whenever I would be at Facebook talking about this stuff, I'd even do like focus groups. We do focus groups with teenagers, and I would sit behind a glass pane, right, like one of those like one-sided windows where there'd be a bunch of teenagers just sitting in a room, and we'd have our researcher from my team and everything, and I'd be sitting in the back like kind of pacing back and forth trying to see like what we're learning about my own demographic. Like I could just walk outside and just hang out with some teenagers and maybe I'd learn something, but no, we had to do it this way, right? At the same time though, I relied on my sister. She obviously like has a much more I guess she has a much more developed social intelligence than I do, I think. And so I relied on her to just kind of keep me in tune with everything. And I'd ask her like, oh, could you send me a screenshot of your phone's home screen? Right. And she'd be like, why? I'm like, I just want to understand what you guys are using. And then I'd ask a bunch of her friends and my friends to send me screenshots of their home screens. And I would use those screenshots, and I'd put those screenshots in some slide deck, and I'd try and analyze like the position of different app icons that they placed on their home screens and why they chose to do that. And that would kind of help me understand where the trends were going in that sense, right? I mean, so much that some of those screenshots were used in company-wide talks by the chief product officer, where they put up the screenshots. I remember he asked me, he was like, can we put the screenshots of your sister's friends' home screens on these presentations that are going to be blasted in every single campus throughout all of Facebook at their like monthly product announcement thing? I was like, yeah, sure, let me ask them. They were like, yeah, sure, okay. And there they went. They blasted these screenshots of their home screens on every single monitor and display and Megatron that they have at every company. And I was just sitting there like, all right, what are they gonna do with this? Like like thinking this is kind of crazy because I'm just sitting there with everybody else, but I'm also kind of directing the I guess the approach that Facebook was taking at the time to their biggest competitor, which was Snapchat.
Yeah, that's funny, man. Like, I feel like if you work with Zuckerberg, like, he just walks around the office all day muttering, like, fucking Winklevosses. I fucking hate the Winklevosses.
No, you care less about that. Like, it's funny because, like, I think that's how people see it. Like, I think people do see it that way. But frankly, he's got, like, much bigger things, I think, on his mind in that regard. Like, all that stuff is like, it's like so small and insignificant, I think, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, he's like with all the money that like he made. Like, I mean, when you can start when buying basically a jet is the financial equivalent of the average American spending 30-40 cents. It's kind of like he's got.
And I mean, and now I would say it's beyond the money. I would say
sure.
Like I frankly I don't even think he cares about how much money he has. And I know that sounds weird, but like it's just like at that stage, like Facebook might make its own currency soon, right? Like,
yeah, the digital dollar. I want
like
to talk
the idea
about
of money is just like another thing that governments offer people currencies, right? Like Facebook's at a different stage, right? And so is Google and Apple and a lot of these companies. They're really at this I would say it's almost like a nation state like level of influence over the world, where more so than the money that these companies have, it's the power they have, right? Just the actual literal power that they have, that is worth more than all the money they could make.
Yeah, well, speaking of making money, I mean, you talk about Facebook jokingly making their own currency, but like that's a very real thing now that Meta has
Oh yeah.
rebranded, and then they're talking about making the metaverse, and that's I'm a big
Oh yeah.
cryptocurrency nerd. I don't know how into crypto you are, but
Oh,
if you keep
I
up with,
know about it. I mean,
how can you
I
not?
can
That's
tell
like
you
that's
my
right up your
thoughts.
alley, right? Like I mean, that has to be. So when you were at Facebook, and I mean that was several years ago, there probably was there any talk about like how focused was Facebook on like VR, augmented reality, AI, and things like the metaverse, or was that not really a
Well,
conversation yet?
it's well, it was like 10,000, 13,000 people at the time at the company, so it had grown to a sizable amount, but it was much smaller than it is today. And even then, there were multiple avenues to be able to build different things or focus on different things. I think Zuckerberg liked to focus on one thing at a time, in terms of like his efforts to, or maybe not one thing, but a couple of things. So he'll pull certain people in when he's trying to solve particular problems. I happen to be there with the Snapchat stuff, but there was also the AR stuff, right? Like Oculus had been acquired, WhatsApp had just been acquired at that point too, and there were a couple of areas like that that he was also very interested in. And I think like the company as a whole didn't have like just one thing that they were trying to solve. I will say though, like VR and AR at that point were like one step removed from where they are today. So back then, the goal was to turn Facebook from a text web desktop based like product into a mobile first, camera first, production and consumption world, right? So it was almost like, let's grab the text box where you put what you're up to and turn it into a camera with effects and AR, masks and all that kind of stuff. And that was the big push to kind of combat Snapchat and also like grow into what Instagram was slowly becoming as well within the company. So that big shift was like this camera first world that Facebook went into. That was the primary focus for a while. I think they looked at that as like a stepping stone towards VR and AR, right? So I think the ultimate goal of becoming this like metaverse stuff has always been in the back of the minds of most of the folks at Facebook. That's not like a new thing. It's just like strategically it made sense to go slowly into the space using the devices that everyone has on hand, right? Like you're not gonna try and like build a product in VR if nobody has a VR headset or if the headsets aren't good enough yet, right? So they use the phone as like a way to understand users more and build up to eventually making some type of VR thing once people have headsets.
So, I mean, like having worked at Facebook and Google, and now you're at Roblox. And let me just tell you real quick. So, like, my son, who's just turned 11, gives exactly zero fucks about my podcast until I said that we're having someone that works at Roblox on. And he was like, "What, Dad? Roblox?" He's like, "The thing I spend 14 hours a day on, and I'm spending all
Oh
your
my
money
God.
on Roblox." So, which it brings me to like 2 points. One, I mean, like, I want to talk about AI and VR in a second, but like, you're kind of the like the poster boy for one of the things I preach, because the argument I think we have, right, is your parents kind of grew up in that analog world. Like they made their money. They came here from Peru in 1990. They opened a Peruvian chicken restaurant in Miami, and it was that like
Yep.
serve one person, we bring you the food. And it's very
Yeah.
hands-on, and you're very
Yeah.
much the next generation where you're in the digital world, right? Like everything is the things you created where you didn't have to like go out there and do one person. You could serve thousands of people from your living room couch, right? And one of the things that I think that we like my generation or even the generations after me they get challenged with is like they make that like that old mentality of like stop watching TV, stop playing video games, go study, go to college.
Oh,
Here's the
yeah,
route
yeah.
you should go down. And my view is always like, and this is an argument I have with my mother, because grandparents always know the best way to raise kids, is when my kids they play Roblox and they play these games, and I'm like, that's what their passion is. And the way that I view it is that he's on Roblox 8 hours a day, which is probably great for you, but like they're on Roblox 8 hours a day. The way I view it has always been like, well, if that's what he's passionate about, how do we figure out a way to like nurture that? Like, well, what if he starts
Yeah.
getting into coding and developing and making these games? And like that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast, is just selfishly for my son too, because I think you're like the epitome of that. You didn't graduate from college, you didn't graduate from high school, but yet you're still here like making more than 99% of the people that went to college. You don't have debt. You have real world experience and great life experience for your age, and like because you followed a passion.
Yeah, yeah, I would say that's definitely true. I will say though, I also wasn't like this wasn't something that I was always thinking as a kid. Oh, I want to become an app developer. I want to help build these products. I want to come up with ideas for apps. It wasn't always that. It was more so I had stumbled upon it after I was playing around on the computer making these apps, just like kind of having fun with it. And when I realized they made money and my parents had lost their business, I felt like it was my job to figure out a way to make more money with these apps. So I looked at it as like, okay, this is the future of where money's going to be made, where the world is building products. I got to learn how to use these tools because this is the language that the world will communicate in the future. So I kind of thought of it that way. I would say though, like you're totally right. The solution here, I think, for parents that are worried about how tech is influencing the world is we just need more people who understand how they work. Like we have such a small percentage of the world that knows how these computers work, and those are the only people that can decide or influence in any way what happens with them. You could say you have all the people in Congress that agree with you, you have all the people in the world in Congress that agree with you on how to do things, but if they don't know how the computer works, they will never pass any law that makes
Right.
what sense whatsoever to do anything to help anyone with the concerns that people have about how tech works. So the number one thing I think we need are people who not only are raised with the right values, but also understand how these computers work so that they can push back and build the products that they feel help the next generation out a little bit better, and maybe build tech products that don't cause so much harm to people.
Yeah, and that's funny too because you talked about this in the past, but in terms of like understanding the tech world, there's still congressmen and shit that when they had like Zuckerberg testify, they're like, "What's is WhatsApp the same as email?" And like,
Yeah,
how are you making policy that'll govern the world when you don't know your
yeah,
ass from a hickory nut? Like, it's
yeah.
crazy.
It's ridiculous. It's embarrassing. And it's scary because to me, I think that's a sign that like, if we don't find a way to get our Congress to be more tech literate, they're just gonna be overtaken. Like I just think it'll like they'll go into this ceremonial state like the monarchy in England, where they're just there as like a remnant of a system that used to have some sort of power, that was eventually replaced by another. That's something that I think is certainly possible if we don't find a way to make sure that those who represent us are more tech literate. And I don't think that can be done overnight. I don't think we can just pick people who know how to code right now because they'll all be like 30, right? But
Yeah.
we need to do something to make sure the kids that we're educating end up having that understanding of how it works, how to code. I think of it as like it should just be another language like English or Spanish that somebody learns in school. It's just the language of our overlords or whatever. We
Yeah.
should probably know, right?
I mean, I think that like schools nowadays, they're still so like they're for a large part they're still far behind in like curriculums and teaching
Yeah,
real world skills and
yeah,
like there's no I didn't graduate high school, but like so like I owned a few businesses and that was one of my always like things people would always like, oh, what college did you go to? And I was just like, I never went to college, but everyone that works for me did, so it kind of balances. So like I was like always because like I think that like growing up you get this idea that okay, here's what you got to do. Your parents drill into you got to go to school, you got to get good grades so that you can get into a good school, so that you can get a good job, so that you can go work a 9 to 5 and make X number of dollars. But what they don't teach is entrepreneurship. They don't teach like following your passions in school. They don't teach like a lot. I mean, who needs to? When was the last time you used fucking trigonometry or like calculus or like like the last biology thing I had was like weed burns at this temperature and gets me really high. So like there's no like I think that
I
like we're
mean,
kind
yeah,
of
they don't even teach you how to do your taxes. They don't teach
yeah
you how the government works. They don't teach you how voting works. They don't teach you how the judicial system works. They don't teach you anything that would actually like I think help you in many ways. And I mean it makes sense. Like I I think like there should be a little bit more of a job preparedness in schools than there is today. I think a lot of what school is kind of teaching you the basics that they were taught. But I also think another big problem that we have with schools is like technology is moving very fast, right? Like my phone today can do more than my phone 10 years ago could ever barely do, right? And
right
every 5 to 10 years the code that we use to write or build apps is completely different. Not only that, I'm pretty sure that those who grew up 20 years ago, rarely do they know how these phones even work compared to kids who grew up with them, right? Because things change so fast that we're in the first period in human history where the tools that you use to communicate, the child knows more how to use than the parent. There's no advice a parent can give their kid. There's no grandmother advice on how to like use this tool. Like, you know, like
There's no
1,000 years
farmer's
ago, there was this
almanac on
same tool,
like
right?
Blackberries.
Like there was the same tool. You had like, for example, the phone existed for like, I don't know, a couple hundred years before any other communication tool took over. So you could imagine that parents and their grandparents told their kids how to use it. Same with the radio. There were understandings of entire lives of humans that learned how they worked. We don't have that ability today. Today, whatever tool that the 4-year-old has on their iPad, the parent has never heard of. So how is any advice going to be passed down? It can't, right? And worse so, when you go to school, what is the school going to teach the kid? It can't teach it anything because the teachers, by definition, are older than the kids, meaning they don't understand what the kids know. So our education system is partly broken because our tools are advancing too quickly. Like there is no teacher in the world that has the perspective of a kid with the tools that the kid is going to use in the future to build products. It's basically just become, useless in that sense, for that reason. And I think that's worrisome. I sometimes wonder, what if we advance too quickly? What if our tools are changing too fast?
Well, speaking of advancing quickly, I mean, I have a whole diatribe I can go into about why I think like Roswell and the alien crash was the reason that we've been like deconstructing technology, and you look at how fast we've grown since then. But putting that to the side, talking about growing fast and things, and you were recruited by Google, I believe, to develop AI and VR, and that's probably the biggest fear. And it's not a daily fear. I don't wake up, right? But like virtual reality, not a fear, but like AI, and you talked about this a little bit too. Is like all these algorithms that show us, here's the photo you're going to like because you were on this for 1/8 of a second and things like that. And like all the conditioning and the AIs are learning. And you said something that I thought was really, really, it really struck me. You made a comment in an interview about how AI, like it's the car driving, it has to make a decision at some point. Do I save the life of the pedestrian that I'm going to hit if I don't, or do I save the life of the driver because I'm going to do this protocol? When it has to make those decisions because of the learning capabilities and everything else, like that's where does the line come in with that decision versus like now it's grown 500 years later that, hey, is the way to save 1 million people in Florida by turning off the water and electric to 800,000 people in Utah, and it just decides now we're going to kill all those people. Like, how do you feel about AI, and like how do we balance that with like the very, in my opinion, very real dangers of it, like going, we don't need humans, you guys are silly.
Well, okay. I think the challenge is that we're not at a point where we can stop this before it already like takes over, right? Like it's already taken over. So many of the decisions in our lives are actually made that way. AI controls, for the most part, a lot of stock trading, controls the pricing of most things, controls pretty much what information you know about, right? Because artificial intelligence, these algorithms, they rank your news. So you don't decide what you know, right? These algorithms do. And so like, so like we've gotten to a point where our actions aren't really completely independent of the algorithms that kind of influence them. It's almost like those relationships between different organisms that kind of depend on each other to live. We're kind of in that state right now with AI, where like it kind of runs most things for us. So I don't know if there's a solution, and it's scary because they're going to continue to AI is going to continue to get more advanced, and it's going to start making more decisions for us. And I don't see this as a sudden shift. I almost see this as like a continuous progression that we've had since we invented like sticks and stones to use as tools for things. And that sounds like, what do you mean? But like every single time that we've invented a tool, we've invented it to replace something else we could have done instead. When we invented glasses, we did that so that we wouldn't, have to squint. So then, more people need glasses. And as we invent more tools to replace our abilities, like forklifts, in order for us to not lift things ourselves, we start doing weird things like inventing a gym. Like that's so strange that we have a gym, right? Like the whole purpose of that is to simulate an environment that we've gotten rid of because we didn't want to do that. And so now we have to go and pretend to run away from a lion on this like machine, right? Like in order to stay alive, because we
Right.
basically like eliminated these things to keep us healthy, right? And so I think of it as like this AI stuff and the decisions that it makes for driving cars or deciding, what information we read is just another tool we've built that is slowly kind of replacing all the decisions that we make. And I guess we're getting to the point where people are starting to ask, like, how many more tools do we really want to build? Do we want to, build out all of these things that help us do the things we did to the point where we don't do anything? Like, is that really the goal? Like, what is the end state? Is there a way to even stop it? Is this how it's supposed to go? So I think people are starting to ask that now because they start seeing these decisions being made for them, which to be fair, i I don't think I can just, for example, I can't just build an app that doesn't have an algorithm and be like, oh, look, this is a news app with no algorithm. If anyone wants to be free from, the AI, don't go and download it. It wouldn't work. It's like a cigarette. Like people aren't going to go and smoke a cigarette that doesn't have the chemicals that make them addicted. There's no way people are going to download a no algorithm news app and enjoy it as much because the algorithm is designed to make you interested, and
It's
the
like a
news
neg
app with no algorithm is going to be boring.
Yeah, and it's like a negative feedback loop too, because you mentioned your sister before used to play a video game. Once you kind of explained to her like you're never going to beat your high score, it changes and adjusts the algorithm to keep you. What's so funny? It just keeps you like right there, just hanging on a little bit, but you can't actually beat it and stuff because it's like these algorithms like, they're designed to like a cigarette to keep you addicted to that platform, that view time,
Yeah.
that thing. It's the illusion of free will and choice.
Yeah, and I would say that like there is like, for example, what I was talking about regarding algorithms being used to help make decisions or replace functions for people, and then there's like what we're starting to see as well, which is like these algorithms being used to, I don't know, make someone stick to an app all day so that they can see more ads and they can generate revenue, or an algorithm used so that you can be frustrated all day but continuously use their app. There are algorithms that are now being used to force, I guess, like certain goals of a company on a person's behavior, and they're powerful enough to do that, right? Like the algorithms are. So I usually like to ask the question like, what is the goal of this algorithm? That usually helps me understand whether or not I should be using the product with it, because algorithms are all around us and we can't escape them, right? Like if the goal of an algorithm is to find the right price for me to buy an airline ticket that's just high enough, and also just low enough for me to click buy, I get it. I understand the purpose of it. All right, whatever. But if the goal of an algorithm is to keep me playing a game thinking I'm going to beat my previous high score from a year ago and always making me just close enough to beating it and then randomly kind of making it really hard on purpose,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I would spend much of my time playing that game at that point, right? Because then I understand the randomness of it, right? The intention, the goal of the algorithm. And I ask myself, is that what I want to do with the rest of my life? No, right? But it's not that easy for people. I mean, I say that, but
I mean, there's like, so that's one example, right? With an algorithm with, hey, with a kayak, the price on this is going up or down and based on what
yeah,
you're looking at and stuff. But like when there's algorithms that are like feeding content to people, like, and you think you
yeah,
talked about this in videos
news.
too, like it's feeding you news headlines, pictures, photos, and then
Oh yeah.
the feedback loop can become negative because what role do you think algorithms are playing like with, raising kids and stuff? Do you think that we're giving kids like girls, for instance, right? Like I got to wear makeup to look pretty because I saw this or this, and it's like
Yep, yep,
there's a
yep.
psychological impact that's got to be huge
Yeah.
based on these algorithms. How do you
Well,
like
yeah,
have
yeah,
how do you like judge? Do you have to sit there and go
yeah.
from a moral compass point of view? This is a project I want to work on versus not.
Yeah, well, I mean, okay, the way I would say it is like, I don't know if we even have a, like, it's hard because we've already replaced our news, right? So now our news is ranked, which means everything that you and I know about the world and how it works and what are the concerns have been decided by an algorithm. So what that means is like, we no longer have full autonomous control or independent free will detached from whatever the algorithm fed us. Like our entire, like all the news is based on what's trending on the internet, and what's trending on the internet is based on algorithms and what people reacted to. So really, even the information or concerns that people have about AI is only possible to emerge from the AI that already decided that we would have that concern. So we're almost in this a little bit of like a philosophical problem of like, how much control do we even have anymore in that regard? But to answer your question less philosophically, and just kind of literally, I think like I'm actually very afraid of algorithms. I think like there maybe a solution to this might involve limiting what algorithms can be used for. So like if there's something like, for example, we say algorithms are not allowed to be used for any information like ranking or news ranking. So no more news ranking with algorithms is allowed or something like that. Then I think that might be interesting to, you know, see what happens, right? If that were the case, I think that might be something that could be better than what we have. But then it gets hard to say, you know, and I hate to sound so pessimistic with it, because I think a lot of the conversation has always been, you know, how do we fight this, right? Like in the movies, when you see like Terminator, we have a chance, we're still here. But like, you know, just because we're still here and alive doesn't mean that we have any chance of winning a war that was already, you know, was already lost in a sense. And so I kind of see it that way. And I don't know, at this point, I kind of look at it as like, well, what do we do, right? Now that we have this, my thinking around it is like, when we look at what kids can do with these algorithms, it's like, it's all about the goal of the algorithm, right? A lot of the algorithms that are worse, I think, are when the goal of the algorithm has nothing to do with the incentive of the person. So like a goal of an algorithm can be, this person needs to watch as many videos as possible and click on as many and stay watching forever. If that is the goal of the algorithm, it doesn't account the human's emotion. So if a person feels depressed, or if a person feels like their self-esteem is crushed because on Instagram all they see are pictures of whatever they want to look like or whatever like that, but it keeps them in the app, the human being will keep going into the app and the algorithm will think it's good, because the algorithm is not accounting for the emotion of the person in terms of their success, in terms of the algorithm's success to achieve whatever the goal was. So if the goal of an algorithm does not include the well-being of the person, that's where you start to see the problems. And I think what we've realized over the past few years is that emotionally, people will use an app over and over if it brings them happiness, but they'll also use it over and over if it makes them depressed. Emotions are so easily addictive. Someone can feel sad and come back to something to feel that sadness over and over. And apps that don't account for the emotional well-being of a person will, for better or worse, keep those people hooked on those emotions, you know, forever. And you know, like I'll give you an example. Like sometimes I'll use, for example, I'll use Reddit because it makes me angry. And sometimes I just love getting angry. So I'll go on Reddit and I'll just read things and it'll just make me angry. And it's like I'm feeding this anger, this emotional anger that comes out of using Reddit. And I just want to keep going and keep going. And I know if I ever want to get angry about whatever's happening, I'll go on Reddit and it just makes me angry and I'm good. I got my fix, right? Like that's crazy. That's crazy that we live in that world. But you know, that I would say is something that could potentially be solved.
You said something in an interview, I think it was a TED Talk, that, and this is kind of just the idea of the dichotomy of the algorithms made me think of this, that like this, a success story sometimes is very parallel to like a survivor story. And you kind of had one of the truisms that I think that you talked about a tremendous amount growing up was that you kind of had like these two roles you'd play, where on one hand, people viewed you, you have these television crews coming from Peru and he's the brilliant app kid and everyone, you're inspiring guys. And then you go back home and you close the door and your folks are like, we got to pay the bills, we need money for this, and it's like and at 14 years old you had the pressure. Really, that's fucking nuts, man. Like you were I mean, your mom gave you $100, was like, here's my investment in your career, and then next thing you know, you're paying for your family, your sister, you have all that weight on your shoulders. Like, how did you not have a fucking mental breakdown between having to deal with that stress and then, because there's a very real emotional thing. Like, it's one thing to be like, this sucks and I deal with it. And then but you don't have to walk outside and go, hey, everybody, like, let's fucking go create apps and be wonderful. You can do anything you set your mind to. And then you go home, it's like,
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, that dynamic was very difficult. I will say though, I think if it wasn't for that, I would not have learned what I think I needed to learn in order to get to where I am today in my career. It's one of those things where like I wonder when I have kids, like what am I gonna do? Because like I would never want my kids to suffer, but then I understand that like part of the reason that I was able to understand certain things about how apps work or how to monetize them or how they succeed is because I had this desperation, this stress on my shoulders. If I didn't have that pressure, I probably would have just, I don't know, fucked around, gone, to just waste my time as a kid doing whatever, playing, just being a kid. And I probably would not have understood a lot of the things that I did. So I almost wonder because I don't know what to do in the case where what if I wanted to have my kids build something better than I did? What do I do? Like what is the environment that like
Just
breeds
that's
that
it sets
without
a weird precedent,
causing
right? Like
trauma,
I
right?
gotta
Like
make them struggle. I gotta quit my job. I gotta really put these kids
like
through fucking hell.
I don't know. I don't know. And I guess there's a balance to it. And there must be some answer to this. I don't know. I'm 25. I got no idea. But that's kind of one of the questions I've had over the years has been like, how much of this has contributed to my success and how much of it hasn't. Another part is I worry a little bit about trying to tell myself that my stress contributed to my success, partly because I don't want to feel like it was a waste of having to stress. Like, I don't, part of my brain doesn't want to feel sad about what happened or feel like I could have lived a better life and had an even better outcome, right? And so maybe I tell myself, oh, the struggles were part of the reason I succeeded as part of my own psychology or whatever. So anyway, as you can tell, what I've done a lot over the years and my coping mechanism for dealing with all of these problems was just questioning myself, questioning my environment, asking like, why is this the way it is, or why is this happening, to no end. And that ability to I guess hone in this like questioning mindset whenever I'm stressed, is what I think gave me ultimately the ability to understand people and psychology enough so that when I combined it with my understanding of programming and computers, I could build products and predict the trends of what's going to happen in the industry.
Well,
And so that I think ultimately is the case. Yeah.
yeah, I think that that's probably one of the reasons you said a mouthful there, and I'm like writing chicken scratch here because like you hit on some amazing points. One of them, I mean, it reminded me of necessity is the mother of all invention, and like the reason you're successful came from the place of like shit. How do I make this into something for my family?
Yeah.
And then the other thing you talked about was like you said like you vacillated with these questions of do I do this and what happens if I had a better life, but like really it like I've always been a big believer in saying that like it's not what happens to you in life, it's how you choose to deal with it. And asking questions is powerful because so many people go through life with the assumption of an answer. Oh, this is what we think is best versus the way that you just kind of view the world and asking those questions and allows you to be more malleable and have different thought processes and stuff. And I think that's like you say I'm only 25, but like fucking I'm 41. You make me feel old, bro. So like I think that like you have there's an old saying. I have a Chinese kung fu background, but like enlightened, like it's like to have a light within, like to ask yourself questions, and I think that's really important. Someone who also asked a lot of questions, I'd love to get your take on, is like Edward Snowden. Have you, from a technical perspective, what did you think of him? And then also from like, because you guys kind of have I mean, granted he worked for the NSA, but on the same token, you're exposed to things and algorithms and like there's a direct monetary and capital gain for the work you do. And is there ever a point where you're like, man, this is, I don't know if I'm comfortable with this? And do you think there would ever be that point?
I mean, yeah, I simply go and do something else or find another job or leave a company, right? Like if I don't feel comfortable with what I'm doing, I get out, right? And so yeah, like the way I see it in that regard is like I I have my own questions and answers that I came up with in my life growing up about how the world works, how I feel things can be solved, what are the problems that I see. I don't like seeing people suffer. I don't like seeing people addicted to things in bad ways. I like to change those things. And even within my time at each of these companies, it's always for me has always been a focus to kind of dictate roadmap and strategy from my experiences too, from my perspective. And that doesn't mean that the company is going to go with whatever I say. It just means that like my perspective is going to be one of the many that ultimately results in what the company does. And I obviously cannot change everybody's minds, but I can influence with my perspective. And if I feel like I'm doing something to slightly shift the course of a company or a product in a direction that slowly goes towards something I believe is making it better for people, that's where I get the excitement. That's where I get the impact, right? And I'm not afraid of. I remember at Facebook, I'd write internal posts, complaining about this or that product and saying like how I felt so frustrated with the way that the company was handling this, or I felt so frustrated about the direction of this, and we should care more about this, and we should care more about these people and these people because we're doing this harm and that harm. And I'd get in trouble all the time. Like people would, some VPs would meet with me and yell at me and stuff like that would happen all the time. But ultimately, I felt like the company allowed me to do that. Now, other institutions probably don't, right? Like I was lucky that I was allowed to yell at the executives and cause commotion within the company about products that I felt needed to be different. And in many places that's not true. You're not allowed to do that. And those places I just say, all right, just get up and leave or find something else to do.
Is the corporate culture at like, I mean, there's a lot to be said about like, or not to be said, but a lot is spoken about like the corporate culture at Google and Facebook and it being a more relaxed kind of environment. Is it the same way at Roblox? Do you see like there's a lot of like these younger kind of cool hipper startups that are more tech savvy or more the corporate culture is a little different versus like the law firms?
They're all kind of very similar. I would say at this point, a lot of them are very similar. All these companies are very similar. I will say like Facebook in particular in the earlier days was very willing to allow people to say whatever they wanted within the company and like create drama. Like I remember like the CEO of Instagram would get questions about posts that I wrote internally questioning the strategy of Instagram, for example. And he didn't like the questions that they were asking him about me, right? He'd get angry about it. But like the fact that the company allowed me to do that and wouldn't fire me, but rather like that was kind of the job was not something I see too often these days. And I think like in particular with Facebook, that's kind of what they had at that point. I don't think they have a lot of that today. I don't think most companies have a lot of that today. I think it's important to have that. I think more companies should. Because frankly, at the end of the day, the goal of the company is to survive and grow. And if part of the solution to do that actually involves giving people the ability to question the leadership, to question the direction of the company, you're going to increase your chance of success. So it wasn't like these companies, just to be clear, have been doing this because it's from the goodness of their heart and how much they care about people. No, of course not, right? They're doing it because it actually benefits the company to allow people to question their direction. The more they allow for that questioning, the more they'll be able to come up with the potential directions they take. Maybe they stumble upon a solution they hadn't thought about. And so that mindset is actually what helps them. It's the same thing with like, giving people benefits to eating food on campus, right? Why is a company going to give you, all this free stuff at the company campus? It's not because they just want to make you feel so great and amazing. It's because they want you there all the time. They want you thinking and living and breathing what the company's problems are. So you give them all the incentives to stay. Once remote work came into play, you saw how hesitant those companies who were just giving all these benefits were, how hesitant they all of a sudden became at giving one small benefit of working from your home, right? Why is that? I think there's a lot of interesting components to it, but ultimately, I like to think that one piece of questioning the authority, questioning the leadership direction, is a nice, like, coincidental, like, mutual benefit between employees and those companies.
So you've always been one of the things that I was the same way was and I liked a lot about you is that you're very entrepreneurial and you didn't have like a defined path like where I'm going to be a dentist, so this is the schooling I go to, this is what I happen. You had to figure it out as you go. You put the Encyclopedia Britannica or whatever the fuck it was in the garbage. You went on Google, and that's like funny because that's the first thing I tell. Like I try to get my mom to do the same thing. She just turned 70 and she'll call me with these simple questions that I have no idea, but I'm like, ask Google. Google's so much smarter than me and it gives you the answers to everything. It's at your fingertips. Be resourceful. But the thing that strikes me as a disconnect is here you are at 14 years old creating your own apps, you're making all this money, you're by all getting accolades about how wonderful you are in the tech space, and you're jumping around for these great companies. You worked for the biggest ones: Facebook, Google, Roblox. How come you're not just doing your own thing? I mean, I can't imagine you're happy being handcuffed to some capacity. I can't see if someone stood back and said, Michael is going to be working for another company in 10 years. I go, nah, I don't think so. I feel like there's bigger things in your future.
Yeah, well, I mean, okay. I that's not the first time someone has told me that they think I should build my own company. But I also think of it I think of it a little bit like longer term. I think a lot of times people, they think right now, oh, the cool thing, you got to be like 23, build your company, build the thing. It's going to be super successful, amazing, awesome, whatever.
And they talk exactly like that. They have to say this, like with the company, they have to build it like this.
Yeah. They're like, oh my God, like, you're 23. Yeah, you got to build it. You're going to make so much money. It's going to be amazing. Oh, wow. Yeah. And then, and all these VCs are like, oh my God, you're so young. We're going to invest in you because you must know, and like, yes, I think that there is some benefit to that, as I was talking about, like how the progress of like tech has gone. The younger you are, the more advantageous you have in certain areas. But I think there's some value in understanding how these companies work. I don't think we're going through a continuous, like exponential, change of pace, right? Where every year things change more than the year before all the time. I think it's more like a transitional time period where we're shifting to this internet era, and then things will kind of plateau to some degree after this shift takes place. And so my goal is not necessarily to try and catch up and build something as fast as possible with whatever is the trend today, but rather understand what this transition is going to end up looking like. And so that means working at the companies that are building this stuff. I now understand how social networking giants like Facebook are building their things. I understand how Google is building its, search engine and its entire platform, and how they're competing with Apple and the hardware side of things. I now understand how video game companies are trying to enter the social media space, especially with younger kids and the whole metaverse side. So as I go through these companies, I do what I've always been doing, which is just asking the questions I want to ask, and understanding more pieces of this future world that we'll live in. And so for me, I don't have a rush, maybe, will I build something in the future? Maybe, but I'll only do it if I think of something that needs to be built. And my goal right now is to understand the space as much as possible so that I can, be well informed when I do make that decision. I grew up very risk averse too, and I think that influences it a bit, but I don't have a rush. I'm not worried about it. I think sometimes people think about, well, you got to build a company young. That's when you can take the risk. But I mean, now I can take a risk, but I can quit my job and never have a job for the rest of my life, and I can be fine. So now I can really take risks, right? Like a lot of the advice that people used to say about, like, you're young, take the risk now. I just didn't do that. I didn't feel like I had the ability to. I think maybe that's advice that people give to those who grow up in well-off families. But if you're a kid who's struggling, my advice would not be to just go and build your own company and start, by yourself, because you don't have anything, right? Like, what are you gonna do if you fail? Like, you're gonna live on your own? Like, I always feel like there needs to be there needs to be some awareness of that when people get advice. So anyway, sorry to go off on that tangent there, but to summarize, my answer of why I haven't built a company yet is because what I want to build is probably going to be more complicated than what I could learn from just looking at what teenagers are using today. And in order to build that, I think I need more understanding. So hop around all these companies, understand how they work, and then figure it out from there.
What's the best thing about working at Roblox?
Honestly, when people ask me the reaction about their kids, the kids' reactions to it, I think is the best part. Definitely was the best part is like the kids just being like, oh my God, you work at Roblox? No way, that's so cool. And like, what's funny to me is when I first joined Roblox, I was confused, like, because I didn't really understand. I was like, what is this? I obsession with Roblox. And for the longest time, I thought it was just Minecraft. It turns out it's actually like a Netflix for games, right? So,
Right.
so it's like a whole platform of games.
Do you have
And
like
under
super admin privileges? You go on there and like you're just like I can do anything. I'm God in
oh
this
yeah, yeah, yeah.
platform.
Like they you know the kids they look at it like, oh my God, you're an
Right.
admin. Like
You're
they
you're
freak out. They
you're the Beatles for everyone under 14. That's
yeah, 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 yeah. But I think the most interesting thing about all of this is like just being able to understand what is it going to look like for those kids when they're older? Like, what is their social network? And I say this because, like, when I was a kid, it was all about Instagram and Vine, right? But I wasn't born when the iPhone had a selfie camera. So I wasn't used to like making funny faces when I was a baby on my phone. I got an iPhone when I was in middle school, and only then did they start coming out with the selfie cameras. So these babies that had selfie cameras, when they grew up, they ended up building out social networks that worked for them, which was like TikTok and things like that, where they just dance or do a dance in front of the camera. That's natural to them because they grew up doing that as babies. A lot of the things that you do as a baby will influence what you do when you're older. And they are the only generation that grew up with a selfie camera on their phone when they were a baby, right? So there's a lot of that I think influences the trends of what happens with social media, in particular with kids and Roblox now. I'm just curious to see, what does that turn into? Maybe it turns into the metaverse or whatever. Maybe that's part of Zuckerberg's strategy. Maybe he's trying to build the product for the next teens, and that's
right.
what the metaverse is. And a lot of times I think people look at the meta stuff that Facebook rebranded and they think that it's kind of like, oh, they're avoiding all the bad press. But what if it's the next step in the effort to build products for the next generation of social users? So like an adult Roblox or something. I don't know. So yeah, so I don't know. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's weird because it's a little foreign to me, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I understand it any less. It probably just means I need to just keep myself in tune with what's happening, probably have kids at some point to understand them a little bit better. And maybe have another reason to have kids besides doing it as a research project would be nice too. So yeah, I don't know. It's fun to think about that space. I am less so interested in the medium though, to be honest. I'm not so interested in like whether or not it's like a metaverse virtual space or not. I don't care about that. Frankly, I think it's a little overhyped. I think the whole NFT thing is overhyped. I think the cryptocurrency thing is, I think it's maybe it's dangerously miscommunicated would be the way I would describe cryptocurrency. So there's a lot of that Web3 metaverse stuff that I think, from my understanding of what the big players are doing, it seems like the conversations around that space today outside of them is painting a very different picture of what that outcome is going to look like in 10 to 15 years. I mean, yeah.
I mean, in terms of like, so just to touch on like the crypto stuff. So like there's so much disinformation, and like I'm a big Bitcoiner and cryptocurrency and smart contracts and stuff like that. And I agree with you on the NFT thing. There's a lot of my friends that were always like, oh, NFTs, you got to buy, look, I got this space ape. And not like, I can't, I do think NFTs as non-fungible tokens, they have value. I don't believe that a JPEG, you can't sell me on a JPEG where it'd be worth $300,000.
Yeah, I mean,
the
argument that you take a screenshot of it, like that's not, they don't understand it exactly.
Yeah, I mean, like I think there's a lot of people that don't really truly understand it. But like in the crypto space, what do you mean by like that? It's dangerously miscommunicated.
Okay, so I think the biggest thing that's being talked about with crypto is decentralization, right? There's a big selling point. Oh my gosh, we're all gonna have this democratic power, influence over the money, all this stuff. We're gonna have our freedom. I think it's the opposite. I think cryptocurrency is not taking us towards decentralization at all. If anything, I think it's presenting the tools necessary for the largest institutions to build the most centralized and like non-private forms of financial transactions that have ever existed in the world. You're talking about a tool that allows people to see every single transaction that has taken place from everybody else, right? Mm-hmm. So if you imagine a private institution or government or whatever wanted to make their own currency using that technology, like that is fundamentally different from the messaging or the promise that cryptocurrency was offering, right? Because at that point, a government can say, all right, we're going to create a digital currency that we fully control, where we can see every transaction that takes place permanently. It is the only currency that is allowed in this country, and all cryptocurrencies outside of these are banned, right? Like now you have the ultimate, centralized currency.
Yeah, I mean, I
What is
think
scarier is even the fact that a private company could do it, right? Facebook could be like, oh, we're gonna make a currency. This
they
is the
talked
currency.
about that. The Libra, I think they were talking about
Yeah.
doing.
Or whatever they call it, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Novi or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, like, I think that like the problem is that like cryptocurrency and blockchain technology get lumped together. People don't really the blockchain technology. I mean, like DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. They're at the crux of like what's different is it. I think what cryptocurrency is trying to do is remove the trusted third parties, so like we don't have to worry about the PayPal's, the bank, I mean, really the legacy banking systems. And there are things like Ripple that are really centralized, and then there are things like that already have the DAOs where you can't have a 51% attack unless you have all these miners that are on board with it. And so I mean.
Yeah.
Do you see crypto or blockchain playing a space in like the gaming and like with VR, and like do you think that VR is really gonna? I mean, that's a space that's been talked about for 20 years and hasn't really turned that corner yet. Do you think that's something we're gonna see?
Yes, but I think we're going to see it in a very centralized way. And that's the only thing that I have with the messaging of crypto that I think is the case is like it's going to be more centralized than anything we've seen before. And I think it allows for that centralization to take on. I think we're definitely going to see that be the case. But I don't think it's all that new. Like I'll give you the example. If you build, on Facebook, you can buy stuff on the marketplace, right? On Tinder, you can buy things too. You can buy virtual goods.
What can you buy on Tinder? Isn't that a dating app?
Yeah.
If you're buying things on Tinder, doesn't that escort service?
Yeah, you can buy like virtual roses and stuff.
Oh, okay. Like I'm like, who's like you can buy Michelle on Tinder. It's
yeah,
just,
no.
Okay.
Well, I mean, that's kind of how they. Anyway,
that's how it works, anyways. Yeah. Enough roses and you can buy anybody.
I mean, indirectly, the product kind of does that, which is fucked, but whatever. And that's thanks to the algorithms. I can get into that, but they what do you call it? You can already do this. You can buy virtual goods, right? Even from like Club Penguin or Minecraft days, you could just buy things in these virtual games, and you buy them with US dollar. The only difference is that with cryptocurrency, what I see as the future potential is that a company like Google or Facebook or Apple can make their own currency, and that would be the currency that you use to make those transactions. And so they will just have more control over everything that you can buy and how you buy it and what takes place with it. And they can offer all kinds of incentives to your point that like make it easier, right? The PayPals of the world and the transaction systems that we have today, it kind of make it so that there's 100 middlemen between you and the transaction that you're making, right? That doesn't necessarily need to be the case with cryptocurrency. But that only benefits the company that, if you look at it from a dystopian centralized sense, that would only benefit the company who offers that to the user, because they'll be like, oh, look, you can use our, Apple currency, and you can use that to buy all your stuff. But if you use, the US dollar, we're going to charge you this extra fee, or we're going to charge you this whatever. And so you start seeing people having Apple currency. Mm-hmm. Now, what does that mean? Apple can't fail as a company at that point, right? What if the value of the Apple dollar goes down? People would lose all their money because Apple kind of forced people to use it via their services. So what you end up with is, I think, furthering that transition that I talked about, which is this transition from a democratic governments, nation states with borders into like this weird like tech state world where you have like Apple and Google and so on being like countries, right? Where what is the difference between a government and a tech company right now is a couple of things, right? Government offers safety, financial transactions and transportation for those things, and health services, right? So now Apple and Amazon are already building their own health services, so we're slowly going to get that replaced. The next thing is just financial transactions, build your own cryptocurrency. We have that technology now available for them to do it. And then finally, you just offer home security tools and private police services and things like that. And now you've basically got people asking each other, are you a subscriber to Amazon Life, or like, are you part of the Apple Nation or whatever, right? Like I don't know, that's a few decades away, and it's scary to think about, but that's kind of where I see so then when you talk about like cryptocurrency as a gaming transaction, for example, like, can I buy something in a game or whatever? I just see it as another piece of that, new kind of government system.
So but most of the way it sounds like you're referring to cryptocurrency is in the currency state, though. Like within the ecosystem of Apple, you're using Apple to buy Apple things, and within the ecosystem of Google, you're using that Google. But in terms of like decentralized apps or like Ethereum, where you have smart contracts, or you have like Cardano and stuff with Charles Hodgkins that started that. Do you not see, like you mentioned, democratic governments, right? Like on one side, they become this autonomous situation where now you're defined by the parameters of this currency within this realm. But things like all these war-torn countries too, where like if you can record on the blockchain, like I own that parcel of land, and then when Russia comes in and takes over, you still have an immutable record of that ownership and things. And like blockchain, I think there's where the value is. I really think is the underlying blockchain technology.
Yeah. I totally agree. I do think that there's some value to that. I also do see it as like, I guess I just don't see it being used by most people in a decentralized way. I do think like there may be some cases where that ends up taking place. I think of, like, for example, Facebook's marketplace, where you can buy products that other people are selling. Right now, Facebook basically, has to go through all those transactions with all these middlemen, but they replace it with their own currency. And now you've got a marketplace that Facebook controls of trading products and goods and services to each other using that currency that they have, right? And I look at OpenSea as a great example of what's taking place. People, I think, are very lazy. And I think people also just aren't going to spend all the time in the world to understand how all of the contracts work and the blockchain and the details of like mining and setting up your own nodes or whatever. Like I don't think people are going to do a lot of this, and so you're going to end up with services that do it for them. And as you start to have services built to make it easier for users, you start encountering what I think sounds weird to most people when I say, oh well, Apple will just ban a certain currency from being able to be traded into theirs. And people are like, but wait, why would they do that? How could they do that? They can't do that. Like, why would they? And then you look at OpenSea, and then there's like, OpenSea's decided certain NFTs, nope, you can't do this. This violates our rules. And it's not like you can't trade them, right? They're still there. But if everyone is using one platform and it's become centralized and they decide to remove it, they influence the value of it. So it's no longer, this different system. So I almost see it that way, where like, we have an internet today where you can upload any website and have people access that website. But if Apple or Amazon take you off of their stores and you can't download the app anymore because they took you off, what does that say to the decentralization of the internet, right? And I don't see so far any indication that what the technologies that are building today are going to do to prevent that from repeating again. As depressing as that sounds, but we live in a glory middle golden age, right? Like, where right now cryptocurrency is kind of the Wild West, and you can do whatever you want with it, and it's super decentralized, and it's kind of a big fuzzy disaster that I think like there's a lot of opportunity in to create cool stuff. And I do think that like, unless there's significant changes in some of the tools that are being built, or there are some new I guess like architectures and infrastructure that is built for these things that rests on different premises completely, I think we're headed in that direction.
Well, you talked about it earlier, and it makes a ton of sense. If you think about the fact that you've got these 80-year-old congressmen that aren't able to articulate the difference between WhatsApp and an email, that's one of the issues that cryptocurrency has. It's still so new in the game that most people my age don't have a decent grasp on it. And 1/8 of the people your age think they have a decent grasp on it, but really, like, that's why there's no real regulation yet, because they don't really understand what is this. How do we minimally fuck this up? And I think that they realize too that like the Bitcoin can very well be a threat when you have governments that are, they're sovereign governments like, El Salvador that adopted Bitcoin as a currency and things like that. And like, I'm a big believer in Bitcoin as a store of value for a multitude of reasons, and the blockchain technology and things like that. But I think one of the things that you talked about, like not everyone using it. The cryptocurrency is right now where the internet was in 1997 in terms of adoption and users rate. And I don't know if you're familiar with Metcalfe's law or whatnot.
Yeah.
So like, I
A
mean, I
lot more
think that,
decentralized, a lot more kind of free flowing. Anyone can do anything, Wild West style. Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the things that, regardless of where you are on VR, AI, the internet, technology, cryptocurrency, is that we're really at this like crazy, I feel like we're going to make some huge leaps over the next 20 years in terms of where we go as a society, and whether that's for good or for bad. And I know you'll be a big part of that, keeping the evil hands of Mark Zuckerberg out of our children's hearts. So,
I mean, I don't know. I mean, we'll see where it goes.
No pressure. You must save us from the evil Zuck. So, but hey, man, Michael, I appreciate you so much coming on, man. And I tell everybody this, and because you're in Miami, you may be the first person to take me up on it. I'm always like, if you're in the area, beer, dinner, whatever you want, it's on me, man. So let me know if you're ever around. We'll grab a cerveza, or we'll just coordinate cruise schedules. I've got 4 more this year.
We're on the same boat. Yeah, or ship or whatever.
whatever it is that pisses them off. The love ship. Yeah. So I appreciate it so much, man. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
Cool.